Test 1 2 test 1 2 test 1 2 test 1 2. All right, sound check 1 2 sound check 1 2
sound check 6.
Okay, let's just listen. Okay, and welcome back for another round of Order Bipolar. Welcome back for our second episode. A lot of, I think, projects suffer in their second edition, the kind of sophomore blues. So we may lean into that in this in this second episode. We may thrive. We may outdo ourselves. But question for you, B2. Did you listen to our first episode?
B1, great to continue our journey, wherever it may lead. Yes, I did start by listening back to episode 1. As I think I mentioned, it sounded to me better than I expected. It was somewhat less than totally incoherent, which I thought was terrific.
Yeah. Well, I had a bit of feedback, and I think the first episode was a success. And some of that feedback was, almost a personal attack on myself, saying you need to let B2 speak a little bit more. He's got more broadcasting experience, maybe a more sonorous voice, better diction. So in this episode, we'll try and get a bit more out of you. But our title today is something along the lines of bipolar 1, bipolar 2, bipolar 3, ellipsis. So we're going to try and identify these different bipolar types and where we gain our names from. B1, I'm bipolar 1. B2, you're bipolar 2. And so we're going to try and unpack those differences today. So maybe in simple terms, could you maybe define 1 and 2 and their differences?
Thanks, B1, for all those flattering remarks. I'd like to cast myself on this podcast just as somebody with some lived experience, some medical interest, but certainly not an expert in any of the topics we've tried to broach so far, or any of the topics we will look at into the future. So with that disclaimer, my understanding of the classification of depression and bipolar disorder goes something like this. You have B1, bipolar 1, which really means mania with other features. The psychiatrists out there will correct me, but this is my somewhat informed understanding of the classification. B2, bipolar 2, that's me, is a condition where there is certainly depression and sometimes some periods of being up, excessive shopping, maybe the odd dose of shoplifting, sexual experimentation beyond normal expectation for a middle-aged person, etc. And then B3 is something that gets into the lay literature on bipolar disorder every bit as much as it does into the scientific literature, and is less well defined, certainly in my mind.
Yeah, there's bipolar 3, and I think these classifications, in doing a tiny bit of prep for this episode, was looking at some of the diagnostic manuals, and that could be a fascinating study in of itself. These how we do the classifications for mental illness. One important correction in the most recent update of the DSM, which is, remind me.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, an American publication, to be compared with the International Classification of Diseases. And these two different classifications are revised regularly every few years, and to my knowledge, there's always controversy about new diseases coming in, old diseases going out, and changes of both new and old. So this is a controversial activity, particularly with diseases which are less visible than, for example, appendicitis or a skin rash.
So DSM is the American.
Well, DSM, I believe, comes out from the American Psychiatric Association. So yes, it's American, but it certainly takes on board lots of international feedback and certainly the international literature. The ICD, International Classification of Diseases, comes out of, let's say, affiliates of the World Health Organization.
Mm-hmm. And well, I think because my first manic episode, and we'll have a future discussion about what mania is. I think we could have a lot of discussions about the manic deity and that lived experience. But my first manic episode was overseas in Europe. So I think I was diagnosed maybe with the ICD, and initially, again, a future topic for discussion, the kind of history of our personal diagnoses and the general contingencies of diagnosis. Got a possibly schizophrenic diagnosis in France, possibly bipolar, but just a general bipolar. I later, back in Australia, got a bipolar 1 diagnosis, but also got a separate later diagnosis of a kind of alternate bipolar, which I think is quite a specific one, caused by withdrawal symptoms, caused by the withdrawal of antidepressants. So I've had the B1, the B1, the what we might call B3 or B alternate, possibly schizophrenia. When I had my second severe manic episode a few years later, that's where I had a uniform B1 diagnosis. And I think all these manuals for diagnosing health disorders, and one thing I wanted to mention is that I think both the ICD and the DSM, yet now classify mental illness as disorders. So if we can retract some of our our words, our word choices from episode 1, disorder is the preferred term for mental illness, mood disorders, so bipolar being one of the many mood disorders.
Can I jump in there, B1, and ask why you find the distinction illness, disease, disorder, these different terms, why are the distinctions important to you?
Oh, no, I want to comply with these manuals. I think this is a distinction they've both made in their most recent editions. I'm not sure when the ICD last updated their meta language, but the DSM I think was in 2012 or 2013, and they're now they've changed the wording from mental illness to I don't know if it's mental disorder, but just mood disorder. No, we can embrace the terms. We know that from our first episode, the history of madness goes back as long as humanity, and bipolar known previously as manic depression, up and down, bipolar illness, and now I think the official politically correct term is bipolar disorder. So that's a distinction from the DSM and the ICD. So yeah, I've had a B1 and a kind of B3 and B alternate different diagnoses at different times. What about your brief history of diagnosis?
Not all that brief, actually, B1. If I go back to my experience, there was quite a lot of anxiety, nervousness, worry, and most notably, sleep disorder. So I have developed very poor sleep over many years, and up to the time of my diagnosis of major depression. Sleep disorder was a very large part of it. And, I'm reminded of a saying that came from Nietzsche. He said, when talking about suicide, he said that, and this is a bit grisly in some ways, that the thought of suicide could get you through many a sleepless night. In other words, sleep deprivation can lead to disastrous consequences. And he was saying that the possibility of committing suicide the next day actually was perhaps in some ways compensating for a poor night of sleep. Now that's a very exaggerated thought of Nietzsche's, but it does, I think, tie up sleep disorder with suicide risk, with depression, anxiety. I'm not so clear on the association between sleep disorder and mania. I'm very clear on the association between sleep disorder and depression.
Well, sleep, I've this year had a manic episode, and I think I've had maybe 3 severe episodes of mania in my adult life, and maybe a few hypomanic episodes, and sleep disruption has been a significant feature in all of them. Most recently, jet lag from flying west to east, back to the east coast of Australia, and the sleep disruption triggered a manic episode. Well, a hypomanic episode, manic episode. Maybe it's hard often to define the difference, but sleep is essential to all these disorders and essential for good health. So I think we talk about bipolar 3. I think that's where we start to get into the weeds a little bit, where these manuals, I'm not sure what the DSM says about bipolar 3. There's another term, cyclothymia, which is a kind of milder form of bipolar, like a little bit up, a little bit down, but just as the general human experience is full of ups and downs, it's I think hard for psychiatric professionals and hard for the individual to demarcate these.
But I think B1, we should not get too fussed, and I know you just said we shouldn't get lost in the weeds. As a keen gardener, I think we should agree that B3, bipolar 3, if it's a real entity, and cyclothymia are not the same thing. Cyclothymia, as you have said, is a milder up and down. B3 is this question of relationship between withdrawal of antidepressants and altered mood states. Do you agree with that? You're looking sceptical.
I maybe need to do a little bit of reading. I don't think bipolar 1, bipolar 2, bipolar 3 covers. I think in the ICD there's more of there are alternate forms of bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
But bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 are the principal disorders.
Yeah, and I think we can say that there's a lot of nomenclature going on here, and perhaps that indicates that the disorders are not well defined, just as when there's one clear treatment for a disease, that's good. When there are many supposed treatments for a disease, it suggests we have a much less adequate understanding of the disease itself.
Yeah, well said. So we're almost at the 15-minute mark, B2, and I thought to add a bit of playfulness into our podcast, we do a segment on kind of playful interpretation of some famous historical, literary, filmic characters, controversial as it may be. And I think where I'm going to ask you, does this person have symptoms, had symptoms of 1, 2, 3 alternative, or maybe none? Let's start with Hercules or Heracles.
Well, B1, you've told me that Hercules had bipolar. I defer to you.
1 or 2, though. What do you think? Your memory's your...
Yeah, I think you prefer number 1.
Well, I don't know the myth of Hercules that well, but no, he was up and down, given to madness. Obviously, we could take the very generous interpretation of encountering all those beasts as kind of, delusional, mythic. But he was definitely given to craziness, and I think killed members of his family in a frenzy. So maybe put him down as a B1. What about Winston Churchill?
Well, Winston certainly had low moods. I'm not so sure about mania or hypomania. What I more know about actually was his drinking habit. He'd get up after breakfast, drink champagne until morning tea instead of mineral water, then get through to lunch, maybe have some red wine, then more champagne through until dinner, more wine, and then after dinner there'd be whiskey until about 3 a.m, and that's when his work was most effective.
Okay.
So let's put him down as. I'm going to put him down as B2.
B2. Okay. What about Catherine Zeta-Jones?
Ooh.
Star of films such as Chicago and The Mask of Zorro.
That's really come from left field, B1.
Yes, that's.
Let's put her down as normal.
She's identified as B2.
Really?
I looked that up. I was on the Wikipedia page of bipolar celebrities, and she was a B2 figure.
Yeah, I'm sorry that she seems to have disappeared from the screen in recent years.
Yes, well, hopefully not due to her mental wellness. Let's do 1 or 2 more. What about Jesus of Nazareth?
Well, we all have an opinion on Jesus. A figure of...
Delusions of grandeur?
No, I don't have evidence that he had delusions of grandeur.
Claimed to be God? The Son of God?
Yeah, look, put him down as... Well, also, do we know that he ever actually got depressed?
Well, he was given to mood swings.
Yeah, look, I'm going to pass on Jesus. There are people out there in podcast land who actually believe in Jesus, and I wish them well.
Okay, I'm gonna go for a B1, a speculative B1. And we recently saw the film Monkey Man, a great film, and endorse it, particularly for any Indians voting in the upcoming general elections. I thought the character of Bobby, so this is a film kind of retelling the Hindu myth of Hanuman in a very violent. I don't recommend it for my mother, but I might recommend it for my sister. A very engaging film. And I thought Bobby maybe had symptoms of a disorder. What was your interpretation?
Well, first I should say that when I go to the pictures, I do have this problem nodding off, which is part of my continuing sleep disorder. But what I saw of the film was very exciting. Absolutely lashings of ultra-violence. Actually, B1 was laughing through a lot of those sequences, which I was amazed at. No, I don't think I can cast a vote.
Well, there was a moment in the film he said, "I never sleep," and I thought in the kind of filmic interpretation, we see this heroic journey, single-mindedness, totally fixated on this goal of revenge, no sleep, ultra-violence, a kind of manic. We often hear this manic adjective. I heard it a lot over the weekend in the Australian rules competition. Manic pressure. He had manic energy. So I'm going to make the generous interpretation of Bobby as maybe we could interpret him as another B1 candidate. And maybe on that point we've exceeded our Pomodoro length. So good chat. You're jetting off overseas. I'm about to run out of town. So maybe the next future episodes we'll have to try and set up a Zoom call.
And always happy to hear from you out there in podcast land. The feedback has been incredible.
Okay. See ya.